The outfit I work for is called Protect the Harvest. We started in the year 2010. We work with primarily farm producers, working for food security and consumer choice issues and confronting those who threaten it. We wade into politics and we wade into the courts, and we're the less wholesome part of the whole discussion over these 2 days. The person who started our organization is Mr. Forrest Lucas of Lucas Oil. He grew up on a very small farm, drove a tractor-trailer truck until he was 50. He was poor. He started a lubricants company called Lucas Oil, and he's not poor anymore. He is now in the growing business. They race cars. He's got a cable TV channel, and he also has, for what he calls his golf game, a cattle ranch down in south central Missouri. But he is about food affordability and protecting the viability of an underappreciated system of agriculture, which has been the envy of the world here in the United States and has a lot to do ahead of it. I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what we're doing, and then one item that I think we're not doing near enough about. Here, as the speakers noted this morning, and I don't think you can have a presentation in agriculture unless you note this, we have to double food production by the year 2050. Norman Borlaug was mentioned this morning. I had the great honor to meet him in Washington, D.C. on a couple of occasions, and this quotation, he may have lifted it from somewhere else, but I heard it from him, where he said, a person who's well-fed has many problems. A hungry person only has one problem. The person on the right who has many problems is Prince Charles. He's worth several $100 squillion. The person on the left, photographed in the newspaper, they just have one problem. But the next meal. But I did want to compliment Kay for the programming, and it's not the programming that you're sitting before. It's the one through the wall where I directed my wife to go. And that is because I go to a lot of these conferences, and they're fabulous people and fabulous conferences, but it is extraordinary how often the subject over there is never raised. How in the heck do you double the world's food supply? It is the big issue of our age, as was mentioned this morning. It is the challenge of our age. There's more at stake in almost every manner of human concern than ever before. Yet I'll have people say, well, where are you going this weekend, or where did you come from? I said, well, I'm going to an agricultural conference. Are you going to talk about how to be more productive? No, we're going to talk about animal housing systems and activists. It reminds me again and again of a line from one of my favorite movies. The movie's entitled Gettysburg, and Gettysburg is based on the Civil War novel called The Killer Angels. And there's a scene in it where General James Kempton, I think, he went on to be governor of Virginia, but he's talking with General Pickett over a coffee or a whiskey at night at Gettysburg, and he said, George, I got to hand it to you. He said, you certainly have a talent for complicating the obvious and trivializing the momentous. He says, you ought to run for Congress. And so often when we have these debates, I find myself thinking about trivializing the obvious and or trivializing the momentous and complicating the obvious. Sustainability was discussed this morning. This is a slide I just include, and there are others depending on the crowd, but one of the things that's momentous is not just where we have to go, but where we've been. I don't take issue with corporate America these days taking a fresh look at sustainability, but I grew up with farmers and have known farmers my whole life who have been sustainable under that word and a great many others. I almost feel like the word to some degree has been hijacked. I embrace the word. But I have never known a decent farmer in my life that didn't wake up about every day and say the following: I wonder how I can do a little more with less. And my father was a cattleman, and even before I was born, and even before Silent Spring was published, and in 1962, whatever year that would have been, in the early 60s, my father was out there saying, I wonder how we can make our animals more feed efficient. I wonder how we can make them calve easier. I wonder how we can rotate pasture so that they can use more grass. I wonder how we can run them through the chute fewer times. I wonder how we can use less medicine. I wonder how we can use less fertilizer. And you all know this, but the farmers have been doing this every day. I've never seen a farmer wake up and say, I'm going to go to the office and figure out a way where I can increase the size of my check to Monsanto Corporation today. That's not the way they operate. So I have a definition of sustainability. There's the Missouri Farm Bureau president recently. I was at an event with him, and he said, "Good grief," he said, "My family's been farming on the same land for 6 generations. How sustainable do they want us to be?" And that doesn't just mean economic sustainability, but certainly it means environmental, because they have to take care of the land and they have to take care of the animals. But there's another sustainability issue that is critical, and it's under increasing attack. And it's part of where we get a little cross with some of the corporations who blow in the wind with what they perceive as consumer movements in modern millennial America. But sustainability also includes the viability of technology. I'm not sure how we get anywhere down the road without technology and modern practices. Another thing that Norman Borlaug shared with us is he said simply, technology is not the enemy, hunger is the enemy. This is a group called the Humane Society U.S. These are people who we confront who are opposed to consumer choice and opposed to productive agriculture, and are undermining and disparaging the efficient production of food necessary to feed the non-digestive elite. They're very clear. My goal is the abolition of all animal agriculture. Their objective is quite clear. This is an organization that you're all familiar with. We used to think we were dealing with ideologues, and I suspect we were right back in the day, but that's back when nonprofits were not lucrative. Now they are lucrative, part of the lucrative non-profit, if you will, which is almost a joke these days, a money-making pressure group industry. That's important for a couple of reasons. One is because they've got a lot of money to come after you, and two, since there's so much money in food politics that they're chasing, it probably means they're not going to go away. However, their brand is not necessarily bulletproof, and they're not above the law. Many of you, if not all of you, have read that they recently had to engage in a settlement with Ringling Brothers where, on a suit that was filed against them for racketeering. Imagine if one of your companies had to settle a suit like this for racketeering, the negative fallout that would occur that was largely glossed over by the media. But most of the ads that we do, and I'll get to a little bit of that in a minute, but we don't talk about the Humane Society without mentioning this piece of recent news. The Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma is currently investigating the Humane Society, for deceptive fundraising practices. The Humane Society, I believe, are very akin to bullying tactics. They've been successful at it in the past, and they think it's going to work with the Attorney General Pruitt. They have filed a suit against the Attorney General saying they don't like the breadth of his investigation. So he's both investigating them and defending himself against a suit. I suspect that this won't be the only Attorney General that is going to be a part of these proceedings ultimately. And I suspect the bullies at the Humane Society may find that the Attorney Generals are a little harder to intimidate than some egg producers. A little more on that later. We help with state ballot initiatives. It started in Missouri in 2010 when the Humane Society brought $10 million to Missouri to put the dog breeders out of business. This is a graph from another initiative that HSUS brought to North Dakota on animal rights, animal welfare, and it's a graph, a trend of what happens before our side engages and then what happens after we engage. And this has occurred in other places as well. North Dakota passed the same year a constitutional amendment with farming rights protection in it. The next cycle, which was last year, Missouri approved, narrowly approved, but approved an amendment putting in place protections in the Constitution to permit farming practices and give those in agriculture a legal cause of action should those come in from out of state with impositions that made it harder to employ modern technology and animal practices. This is the text of the Farming Rights Amendment, noting the value of agriculture, and farming and ranching practices shall be forever guaranteed in this state, subject to authorized powers under the Constitution of Missouri. Oklahoma, as of the week before last, has agreed to put Farming Rights Constitutional Amendment on the ballot for the year 2016. Passed the House, went over to the Senate. It was modified in the Senate, went back to the House. The Humane Society was down there fighting it. They did advertisements, so we did as well. So we did ads, they did ads, we did ads, and out of it, we won 85-7 in the House, and we won 39-6 in the Senate. Fairly overwhelming margins. It's a good state, but their messaging was very aggressive. Our messaging was very aggressive in return. Again, we worked closely with farm groups down there in Oklahoma Farm Bureau. They were just fabulous, and a lot of groups and political leadership were terrific. This is something I throw up that we suspect that the other side is likely to do that we think is meaningful. Less so the tail banding prohibition. But there's this top bullet, the protection and prevention of cruelty to livestock. Use of accepted animal husbandry practice is not a negation. This was filed in the previous election, and then it was withdrawn, and I suspect it was withdrawn for political purposes because you had a governor and a senator in tight races, and they didn't want to get the agricultural community all spun up, and it was an off-presidential election year, so I think they decided to save it for later. This is going to come up, we suspect, in Oklahoma on the ballot in 2016. We'll be surprised if it doesn't. But what does it say? What it essentially says is generally accepted animal husbandry practices cannot be used as a defense against cruelty in court. So it means any plaintiff can pull you into court and say branding or concentration. You go down the whole list, different housing options are cruel, and the farmer can't go in any longer and simply say, as a matter of law, it's a generally accepted farming practices, so this is the case I shall win. That's no longer a defense. It's up to the judge and or jury. The next matter that we're watching very closely, and we're involved to some extent, is what's going on in California. For those of you who may not have followed it, there was a 2008, briefly, 2008, there was a housing, egg-laying hen housing matter on the ballot that passed that said that chickens, that hens had to have this much room or be turned loose. And it passed by a fairly significant margin. I suspect what happened shortly after is on behalf of California egg producers who were suddenly made uncompetitive with producers in every other state, the legislature said, well, and this is what California does, to be equally as to compete with other states, they have to make other states equally as uncompetitive as they are. So what they essentially did is they said all eggs sold in California have to meet the same standards, which a great number of attorneys believe is probably a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. But what it is, first and foremost, is it's turned into a regressive tax on the poor. It to me makes the debate fairly transparent. This whole subject that you see where you have the elite dictating rules that drive up the cost of food products that the less fortunate have a hard time paying for. I was struck some time ago. The New York Times did an editorial saying that this is not a big deal. We should embrace it. It's not costly. It's a penny an egg. We had a hard time believing you could drive up fixed and variable costs that high and not have market impacts that would hit the low-income people the most. I spent Monday and yesterday in Los Angeles, and while there, I wasn't in Beverly Hills. I was in Boyle Heights. I was in East LA, and I was in Watts, Vernon, and Southgate. I went to 26 different markets because a dozen eggs here in the Kansas City area is about $1.50 a dozen, give or take. But there was nothing less than $2.75 a dozen. Now, the New York Times may not want to go to Watts like I did to report it, and I suspect they won't. Even the people that champion themselves as being advocates for the poor have been noticeably mute on this whole issue. But I at least spent 2 days with the voiceless consumers who saw the world's cheapest protein price doubled. So I think in the future, one of the alliances that we're going to have is that these voiceless people are going to need to be partnered with, because their voice is one that is never heard at these conferences. And they are consumers no less than the digestive elite that Nestle's trying to serve. And they are worldwide, and they're in the number of the billions. We still have 2.5 billion people in the world that live on less than $2 a day, and as was said this morning, there are 47 million people on public assistance, and more than a quarter of the population in California is in poverty. And the sections where I was yesterday and the day before, it wasn't a quarter. It was somewhere north of 70–80%. So I think the advocates for the needy are going to, in the future, going to have to be our most natural partners. We're doing some programs in some of the Midwestern states to get hooked up with some of these allies. We're supporting legislation and litigation in this effort. And it's not just because of what's happened to eggs. I suspect if there's legislation that passes, it would be wise to exempt or grandfather eggs and move on. Our biggest fear is what's next. If the activists don't think that this is a model that's easy to go to, I would be very surprised. Why? If you don't like a national unfunded mandate from Washington, what are you going to think about national unfunded mandates that originate from Sacramento? I mean, this is a beautiful model. What you can't get done in Washington, you go to Sacramento and you end up with national policy over it. But there are 7 attorney generals who are involved in a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of this. It's bipartisan. Attorney generals are from Utah to Alabama and points in between. I think it's worth noting, this is the United States of America. It's not Moscow, but sometimes it seems like it. The attorney generals went to egg producers trying to get them to sign an affidavit saying that this was tough on business, this trade discrimination. And a grand total of 0 egg producers would sign it. And the ones that we talked to were very clear about it. They were simply afraid. And it wasn't just afraid of being disparaged or afraid of losing customers, but it was of physical vandalism. Again, I am sorry that I'm not talking about Moscow, but I'm talking about right here in the United States of America. To win an argument, you have to make it, but the other side has made it that you're almost not allowed to make the argument. And this, the final thing I'll note here is that one of the places we've gotten involved in that agriculture has largely been absent in, that other industries are, is supporting our political allies. This is a story, the Center for Food Integrity did it. The animal rights movement gets a new foe. What we did was start a super PAC. It's a small super PAC in the whole scheme of super PACs. We did it to support and oppose federal candidates. Agriculture rarely ever does this. It is a huge industry that does precious little in places where other industries feel that it's imperative to go. And I'll just say in summary, without going into great detail, I know that agriculture, whether it's a producer or an agribusiness or a trade association, I know they spend a lot. They think they spend a lot. I'm dead certain it's not enough, and it's probably not even close. And we are going to have to recalibrate our budgets on customer, public, media, and political relations if we think we're not going to continue to go backwards in a great many of these debates. This is one place where we went to on behalf of the United States Senate race, and the ad that we'll not show you is next. But it notes here that $37 million was spent by outside groups and super PACs. And as best as I could tell, out of the $37 million, agriculture represented about 100,000 of it, and that was our outfit. We called in another state, and I won't say who, but it was a state I called a representative of a very large agribusiness, and I said, "Are you following this race?" "Of course we are." "What's at stake here?" He said, "Well, this particular candidate is a disaster." I said, "Well, we're running ads against him." They said, "Ship it to me." And so I shipped it to him. He said, "That's a great ad. Thanks for doing that." I said, "If you guys give us $15,000, we can be on the air another week." And that's where the whole conversation ended. And this was a company that's worth that earns over $20 billion a year that said no. Meanwhile, the oil guy from Indiana is spending his personal oil wealth advocating for agriculture. This was the ad that I'm not going to show you. I always end with this slide. This is a fairly credible source. Peaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat you last, because I think we have a great deal of that, and I think we heard some of it this morning. But I think, the terrific news in closing is what's on our side in this whole debate. We have science on our side, we have experience, we have a track record, we have the truth. Transparency is not our enemy, it's our friend. We have the money, though we're not yet willing to spend it. We have the moral imperative to feed not just the chattering wealthy class, but the balance of the world. The question is whether we have the unity, the guts, and the devotion. And to the degree we don't have it, I suspect we're going to find it because the stakes are too great if we don't. So thank you very much, and Kay, I appreciate you having me.